I am so excited to tell you about my interview today with Dr. Hillary McBride. I have followed Dr. McBride for years, and she is one of the voices that I always turn to when I am looking for truth around my body and the messages that I want to give it. I told her during this interview that I feel like she is able to put to words what so many of us feel inside about our bodies. So I want to tell you a little bit about her before we get started. So Dr. McBride is a registered psychologist, a researcher, and podcaster with expertise in trauma, embodiment, spirituality, and mental health, psychedelic therapies, and women's body image across the lifespan. Her first book, Mothers, Daughters, and Body Image, Learning to Love Ourselves as We Are, was published in 2017. Embodiment and Eating Disorders, Theory, Research, Prevention, and Treatment, which was published in 2018. Her best-selling book, The Wisdom of Your Body, Finding Wholeness, Healing, and Connection Through Embodied Living, came out in the fall of 2021, and Practices for Embodied Living was released early in 2024. Her next book is Holy Hurt, Understanding and Healing from Spiritual Trauma, and that is launching in April 2025. She's on faculty at Trinity Western University and the University of British Columbia. She's an ambassador for Sanctuary Mental Health and the host of CBC's award-winning podcast, Other People's Problems. Season 5 is out May 2025. Dr. McBride makes her home in the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia and Canada, and she can often be found by the ocean or with a cup of chai in hand. I am truly so honored to have been in this conversation with Dr. Bride, and I hope you get as much out of it as I did. Here we go with our interview on Meet Your Body with Dr. Hillary McBride. Here we go. Welcome, Dr. McBride, to Meet Your Body. I truly am thrilled to have you here and meet you. And I kid you not, I was talking to my family probably a month or two ago. My kids are 11 and 7. And so, we were talking about who would you want to meet? Who would you want to interview? And they were probably talking about sports people and everything. Taylor Swift, I'm sure, came up in that conversation. And I said, Dr. Hillary McBride. And they said, who is that? I'm like, It is an amazing woman who I first heard you on Jen Hatmaker's podcast years ago. It might have even been 2020. And I subsequently found everything that you had written and spoke. There's just something so true about what you say and the words you use. And I find myself reading, I have Wisdom of Your Body right here. I find myself seeing that everything I want to say or that I feel, you have the words for. And I feel like that is truly what you are for women right now. So many of us out here, that you put words to what we inherently know, but maybe have forgotten, maybe this inherent knowing that we have that we either don't have words for or we have forgotten. So thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to have you here.
That felt like such a warm welcome. Thank you for letting me know about all of that. And that feels like, I don't want to rush past this, how good that feels to know, there's something that's coming inside of me that's emerging, that is taking shape in the words I use, that resonates with you so deeply. That feels like, that's what we need to feel less alone. Like, what's inside of me is also inside of you. And we can talk about it together. So thank you for that warm introduction.
And I think, and I'm going to have you introduce yourself to everyone in case people don't know who you are. But I think too, being a physical therapist, being in healthcare for a really long time, I am really drawn to the research as well. And I'm not a researcher. That was never my calling. I love to read it, but I do not like to do it. And so the fact that you have research and facts to back up, again, kind of this knowing that we have, is just amazing to me. And I think it's so important for people to kind of realize that, hey, we're talking, yes, about feelings. We're talking about things that might feel abstract, but they are real and they are true. And we know this through science. So I want people to really kind of grab onto that as we start to talk, to know that these are facts along with how we feel. And that is so powerful. And that's what I think we miss a lot right now in this whole wellness, healthcare, women's health kind of space, is we really need both. We can't have one without the other. So thank you for that. Can you go ahead, just tell everyone whatever part of your story you want everyone to know? I mean, you can go back to when you were 5, or you can just start with wherever you want, but let people know what you want them to know.
Yes. Well, it's interesting you say going back to 5, because I think about my young self, who is, in some ways holds the key to me being an even more full version of who I am now. But I remember being a person who was creative and expressive and liked attention to detail and liked to move my body and was very, very, very curious. And so many of those things ring true today. I mean, so much of the work that I do is around expression and connection to myself and connection to others. And I feel like such a playful person, even in the work that I do, which is often so heavy or so challenging or painful. But in between there and now, right, the journey, or I'll tell you about the bridge from there to now. There was a period of time in my youth when I struggled with an eating disorder and some other concurrent mental health conditions that just made it hard to be me, but actually probably the truth is they were telling the truth about how hard it was to be me already. Right. The symptoms, the way that we pathologize women in particular and their struggles and their suffering suggest that there's something wrong. And yet I think often it's our symptoms that are telling us that there was something wrong all along. There's something wrong around us, that the world that we're in, the family we were in, the thing that we did, the thing that happened wasn't okay. And we didn't have space to talk about it. So our bodies do, our symptoms do. And I went through a whole journey of recovery and various forms of treatment. And it was really actually when I had a moment in treatment where I had a clinician who was like, okay, it's time. We're going to do a round of residential care. You're going to move into this facility. And I went to grad school instead, which is not what I would always recommend for people. But I think when I look back, like, why was that so important for me, that turning the corner? Well, it was connecting me to something that was true inside of me, which was my longing to understand and know and sit with pain. To really sit with pain, not just to find ways to manage and cover it up and really to just act like I was better, which is what I'd been doing the whole time in treatment. Like I was getting really good at doing everything everyone told me to do and memorizing all of the treatment, the outcomes that people wanted for me. And yet I was so disconnected from the core of who I was.
Right.
My, as you said earlier, my knowing, right? The places of pain and brilliance and courage and wisdom and like aliveness. So I went to grad school and I started looking at women's relationships with their bodies as part of my early research questions. And what was interesting is I know grad school is often a time for people where symptoms increase, where distress increases. But for me, I actually found my voice and my place and my people and the ability to ask the questions about what's happening here for women. But so many women not just feel disconnected from their bodies, but hate their bodies. I came across a really interesting piece of data. Well, it wasn't a piece of data. It was a theory or like a hypothesis that a scholar was making that said, if there are this many women who feel disconnected from and hate their bodies, maybe that's a normative part of womanhood.
Right.
And something inside of me was like, oh, hell no. Like this cannot be the truth. Like if you have 1,000 canaries in a coal mine, and they're all suffocating. If they're all losing consciousness, if they're all dying, does it mean that canaries are just meant to die in coal mines? No, like there's something inherently toxic in the mine. So in asking these questions about how women come to feel so fragmented from their bodies, and also trying to ask the question, how do we come to rehabilitate our relationship with our bodies? What does that mean about us and the world around us and our relationships and how we think and feel and what we do? I found 2 things. One, that the conversation around body image is so limited. It really pigeonholes us into this idea that appearance, our image, is everything. And it's not, right? Image is one part of being a body, but there's this I have a teacher who says 1,000,000 miles of unexplored territory inside of us, like this whole universe inside the body. How we move, how we do things. The second is that I realized I had really great ideas about embodiment. I had no clue how to do it. I was researching it. I was writing about it in a really scholarly way. I was so disconnected still. And I think it highlighted for me that expert status on this content has nothing to do with how clued in we are to what's happening in our interior life and what's happening with our bodies. So went on a journey to then work on my doctorate and explore the experiences of women and relationship to their bodies across the lifespan, including the menopausal transition. And now my work has extended beyond that. But these are, areas of really a real importance to me personally because of how I think I was trying to kill my body for so long. I was trying to make my body disappear. And I saw that I was not the only one. And I think that there's something normative in our culture about the kind of erasure of the female body, particularly in white contexts, particularly in contexts where thinness is privileged. So I'm still a person who's curious and still a person who has a lot of hope and loves detail. Now I have this incredible way to move that energy into the world. And as a psychologist, I'm a registered psychologist. I sit with people all day, but I love to ask questions. And that's who I am.
That's amazing. And I want to talk about the body image piece really quick because I was actually just reading it in your book last night and I thought it was so important. You talk about, this body positivity, the movement that's happening right now, which so much good around that compared to where we were, but that it's really, and I agree, it's really a first step because for so many people, jumping to love our body and jumping to feel positive about our body is just beyond what we can even think to do. Like, I don't even go to the love part. I mean, that is amazing if you can say you love your body. I think that's a big ask. And I think it's okay if that feels out of the realm of possibility. So this idea of kind of body image and almost body neutrality, and you go even further into that, and I don't want to take words out of your mouth. Can you talk just a little bit about that and how you either even talk to clients or kind of your thoughts around what body image is and how we can step into, like you said, the fullness of it, getting away from the appearance and more what all aspects of our body.
I almost want to take us out of the conversation culturally around body positivity and body neutrality and body image to say our bodies are telling stories worth listening to. And our bodies are telling stories about us, but our bodies are also telling stories about our ancestors and our culture and our climate and our relationships around us. And our bodies are telling stories about nature, about what it means to be alive. And when we move ourselves away from the appearance focus, I think it begins to help us ask more complex questions. Like if my appearance isn't just something I love or feel nothing about, what would it be like to be in relationship with my body? What would it be like to be in relationship with my body as my body was a someone? I like to say our bodies are not a something, they are a someone. And in that, what I'm saying is that our bodies have aliveness and narrative and wisdom and insight and memory. And when we turn towards all of those places inside, not only do we come to know ourselves more, but I think we begin to liberate ourselves from body objectification. I think we begin to liberate ourselves ultimately from like hyper individualization, because I think bodies actually tell us we're connected to each other and connected to the earth. And they have ways of disrupting socio-political kind of system type dynamics, which keep people oppressed. So my thinking, and maybe I'll just add this note in, is I think that body positivity means well. And I actually want us to take some parts from body positivity to be able to say bodies are, I think, inherently good. But as long as we're thinking about image and people are being asked to bypass their trauma for the sake of toting a line, my body's amazing, without actually having done the work to listen to what is my body saying about what it's like to be me, then there's a kind of almost like spiritual bypassing to that's saying like, love your body. It actually, like, our bodies are pretty hard to love sometimes because they carry the memory of the most horrific traumas we've been through: the threat of death, the aloneness, the pain, the suffering, the illness, the potential for objectification. Like, actually, that's hard to love. But there is something about flipping it to say, but bodies are valuable. That takes us out of the body neutrality to say, I'm just not even talking about bodies. I'm just not even looking or thinking about bodies. Well, then it's pretty hard to have conversations about sizeism and racism and sexism and ageism and transphobia and homophobia. It's pretty hard to have conversations about socio-political oppression and the way that bodies are marginalized if we're pretending bodies don't really exist and don't have an impact on our reality. Like, how do we do trauma work if we are neutral towards bodies? So what I want is something actually like more robust and more honest than neutral or positive. What I want is us being able to say bodies are valuable, deserve to be listened to because they tell stories about what has been painful. And thus we need support in learning to listen to our bodies and believing our bodies have something valuable to say.
Yep. And I know you say too, and again, research shows us this, that our trauma is held in our bodies, that we think so much traumatic things in our past are in our mind. Can you talk a little bit about that, about either how we hold it or what purpose our bodies can serve in helping to release that trauma so we do feel safe? I talk to all of my clients and members about, if you don't feel safe in your body, you can't get to the next step. I mean, this idea of be motivated, be consistent, do this with movement. You can't get there if you don't feel safe in your body. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that you truly can't if you don't feel safe to move. So can you talk a little bit about that, about, just the idea of trauma being held in our body?
There is so much to say in terms of a neuroscience perspective or the psychobiology of trauma, but I want to try to summarize it in a way that feels like just human and accessible to us. Like so you can go really deep on this topic. And if you want to have a little scratch at the surface, you can read my book or other books. But I think that there's a phenomena that many of us are familiar with, which is we move, let's just say you're asleep at night in bed, right? Totally unconscious in dreamland. And there's a noise in your home that wakes you up. And you rush out of bed and you flip on the lights and you look around to see where's the danger because you're ready, right? Your body is mobilized. It's gone from rest to this activated state that says, I'm ready for whatever I find there. And then for some people, they're able to go, oh, okay. Like nothing here. I see that box or that ornament fell off the Christmas tree, or like, oh, that was a branch that hit the window. Okay. And then we flip the light off and we go back to sleep. For another group of people, the light stays on and their body stays ready and engaged, right? There's no turning off the strategies or the defense mechanisms or the support systems or the activation tendencies. They don't get turned off. And there's a reason for that. And that's usually for any, actually there's a ton of reasons for that. Has to do with how many times the light has been flipped on in the past and there actually was something there. It has to do with like, what if someone shames us for running down the stairs and flipping on the light? What happens if we hear another noise or if while we're there and the light is on and we're standing in our living room, something else happens. Right? There's a kind of sequencing that happens for many people in trauma where it's not just one big thing. It's thing after thing after thing that made us think, never turn the light off.
Yes. I'm safer if I keep it on. I'm prepared.
Exactly. And it's safer if I have the light on and I am standing there at the ready with the baseball bat in my hand. Right. So there's many different ways that trauma can manifest in the body, but essentially there's an autonomic nervous system response, which means it's unconscious, which means it's there for our survival and protection that keeps us at the ready, keeps us protected. In some cases, there's a kind of protection that happens where people disconnect and dissociate and actually stop feeling the body. A version of that in this metaphor we're using would be, I'm just going to go back to bed, turn the light off, and I'm just going to sleep through everything that happens. If someone comes in, I'm going to play dead, right? If there's something that happens, if I'm just in bed, at least like I haven't spent any energy to expose myself further in the world. So dissociation is like everything kind of shuts off. We lose contact with sensation from our body to integrate it in a meaningful way to help us live. And as a result, can feel low, depressed, sleepy, disconnected, and like things are just blank inside. But ultimately, when we think about that activation response being on, right, there's all sorts of tendencies that come with the agitation in the body, the sense of, as you said, I'm not safe, right? That's the point of rousing out of bed and flipping the light on, is there's something that's not safe that's happening here. And if we don't have the ability to turn that light off, you can imagine that staying up, so to speak, with the light on at the ready for your whole life is going to start having consequences, right? Your system is going to find it really, really hard to repair. You're going to start to notice, like, oh, the tension that's in your body, sometimes heart racing. Sometimes we start to see things at the level of the organs or the skin. The body eventually says, like, hey, this stress has been so much for me. But I think what's interesting is when, is when we start to look at, like, why is it that some people never get to turn the light off? Why is it that some people stay at the ready and some people get to go back to bed? And like I said, there's like past trauma histories. But what we also see in the research, there's a really seminal paper that was released in 2017 called The Social Model of Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. And the main idea with it is that it's really different if you run down the stairs and turn the light on and you are met with someone who says, hey, that was really scary. Let's check out the house together. We're actually good. Okay, I'm going to come put you back to bed. Essentially, social connection and the ability to be met and validated and held in our reactions, witnessed in the fear, witnessed in the grief and loss that comes with whatever awful thing happened. To be held in community and connection is a way of turning the lights off. It's a way of our body being able to know I'm not alone. And that's because social connection and belonging is so important to our survival, that without it, that in itself is actually a threat. So when you think about the age of loneliness for many of us and how we're more connected and less connected than ever before, our bodies are not actually getting a chance to regulate with other bodies very often. And so we're just not getting cues. We're not getting deeply seen and felt and heard and known in a way that helps turn the light off.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And so that is a perfect actually segue into something else I wanted to talk about, moving into like and I think this probably, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing this applies to women in all stages of life. But you talked recently about perimenopause and menopause and some research that you had found around women who shared their symptoms with others reported fewer symptoms. Can you expound on that a little bit? And again, just I guess that idea of community and how, again, it's like we think about it as, oh, I'll just share my story and it's a nice connection. But the true research and facts around how it can actually make us feel physically better knowing we aren't alone.
Yeah. And I mean, your question gets at something. I'll answer it, but I want to talk about the fundamental assumption underneath it, which for many of us is that we think of ourselves not as bodies and we think of ourselves as individuals, which is essentially a way of saying we think of ourselves as minds that exist in this very disconnected way. And yet our mind is an embodied process. Mind is a relational process. But there is something out of harmony when we are fragmented from ourselves and from each other. In fact, we could say that trauma, not just on an individual, but a systemic level, is about fragmentation. Why are people so alone? What is going on in our society that people are feeling so lonely? And of course, that's going to have impacts on our health and our mental health and our mind. Like, of course, and our bodies, at the level of our bodies, like we need connection in order to feel safe. We need connection and belonging, not just connection, we need belonging. So actually the research I did for my doctoral dissertation was looking at well-being in women, particularly well-being and embodiment in women in the perimenopausal transition. So looking at how women, essentially kind of flipping the script on the story where there's so much pathologization around perimenopause and menopause that it's loss, decay, illness. And that is one version of the story you could tell about perimenopause and menopause, but actually there's other stories available. And so I wanted to know when women do well, what happens? Like when they feel like they actually come through perimenopause and feel empowered, connected to themselves, embodied, more but clear about who they are. I want to know everything about what's happening there, especially someone who is
sign me
right, right, exactly. I always say research is me search, and I am like have made some very good choices about researching things that are personally relevant to help me like do well in my future. and I'm happy to share them. But one of the things that I found in my literature review, actually, and it was replicated in the data that came out in my doctoral work, was that women who had connection with other women in a deep and meaningful way, it wasn't just, let's get together once and talk about our symptoms of menopause. It wasn't just, oh, we went to my doctor. It wasn't just, I have this, group of people that, I belong to and we meet once a year. There was something about women who were consistently engaged in deep relationships with each other, who could share not just about the perimenopause and menopausal transition, but about the deepest places inside of them. Like, what does it mean to be aging? Who am I now? What do you know that I don't know? Can you help me? Do you know something that I don't know? And sharing information about menopause and bodies and life and parenthood and sex and like death and life and, all of that deep, meaningful connections. Mm-hmm. When women have those kinds of deep, meaningful connections, it seems that every part of their lives improves in some way. So you can imagine major identity transitions, which include the renegotiation of a social identity, which is what happens at menopause, to feel like, well, the rest of the world is kind of discarding me and saying I'm invisible because my body is changing and I'm not, I hate to reduce it to this, but like the fertile young woman.
I'm not useful anymore.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Society discards women when they can't be objectified in the same way. And for women to say, oh, but I still have longing and I'm connected to the truth of who I am and I have meaning and purpose and I speak into people's lives and they speak into mine and I have something to offer to this world. Like, to be able to connect to that is like an inoculation against what society does to aging women. Yeah. So it's not just about managing symptoms, but when we think of symptoms as coming from a body process and also from a social process, that when we shift the way that we have been and we undo the aloneness around certain things in our life, of course, our whole body is going to tell the truth about that. Right. So a little finding that I found fascinating from some scholars who did this work more in depth than I did, but looked specifically at culture and menopausal symptoms. And what they found is that where groups of women were living more accurately predicted the symptoms of menopause that they have than the culture that they're from. So if you take women who have immigrated from certain countries, I think in the study, I might get this wrong, I think in the study it was a group of women who were from South Asia who had immigrated to Australia. So you would expect, if there are purely biological qualities to menopausal symptoms, that their symptoms during menopause would replicate those of their families and their mothers and their friends who were living, I think it was in India. But what they found is that their symptoms more accurately reflected the symptoms of those that they were with and living amongst, which has us ask, are we over medicalizing what's happening in menopause and minimizing how much of the way that our bodies tell the story about who we're around and what it's like to be us at this point in our life? There's so many things that we need to know about menopause that we don't yet know. Like the research it's so poor in terms of like how little there is. Yes. And then when there is research, it is so pathologizing and looking specifically at the biomedical pieces that we're missing the other elements of the transition. Like, what does it mean to have a changing identity? Yeah. How am I negotiating my changing sexuality? Yep. How am I accessing power in my body in a different way? And I think there are good reasons for that, because at some point in menopause, there's a group of people who really, really struggle and need support. And women's struggles have historically been ignored and under-researched. So what I'm not suggesting is that we stop looking at populations of people who are struggling and who need help in menopause. But what I do think is that the stories we tell about our lives shape the culture that we're in. Yeah. And if all we have is stories about menopause that suggest it's dangerous, it's bad, it's awful, then we don't really have the cultural language, and we don't have the language between us and inside of us to make sense of all of the other elements of it, including power, agency, meaning, purpose, connection, vitality, well-being, body love, body like awe.
Yeah. And would you say, and I realize I should have asked you the definition of embodiment 30 minutes ago.
Okay.
We're going to come into that.
Okay. We'll do it. We'll do
start
it.
with that because I want everyone to understand exactly what that means. And also, my question is, and maybe we can just talk through it. This idea that, it's just too late. It's too late for me. I tell people, like, it's never too late. It's never too late. So if you have found, this idea, let's talk about what embodiment is and maybe some things that cause us to experience disembodiment and how that might look, or if you think it does look different I'm 47. So how might that look different for me now if I was just coming into this idea of embodiment now versus 20 years from now versus maybe 20 years ago? Is it ever a point that you find that changes, I guess?
Yeah. Okay. I'm just writing some notes because there's such.
I know there was a lot.
I was like, "Ooh, there's a really good." Like, do you have another 8 to 12 hour?
Yes, we need to do many of these.
Yes. So we have. I'll start with the definition of embodiment, and there's no unified definition, but one that I use that I've kind of patchworked together from some other scholars and some of my own thoughts is that embodiment is the lived experience of being a body as that is shaped by the social world around us. So there's no such thing as being in a body in isolation. How it feels inside of me to be me is impacted on a moment-to-moment basis by what's happening around us. And the way that I am in my body is likely impacting the world around me as well, right? We're kind of co-creating reality in this way, all of us. But embodiment, I think if you take it even more down to the granular level of what is happening inside of a person, often the elements that we're looking for or that would help us feel embodiment or be able to say, I'm feeling embodied, is that we're noticing the cues inside of us. We're meaningfully engaging with the data. We know what it's like to be connected to desire.
Right.
We know how to care for our bodies well, and not in a way that is like, oh, someone told me to take a bubble bath, but what does my body need for care? Like maybe my body needs different things for care than yours does, or than mine did 20 years ago or will in 20 years, right? Care is so phenomenological, so uniquely experienced by from person to person. So there is that, right? And there's the ability to say, I'm not just a thing, I'm a someone. My body has something of value to the world and to me and deserves to be listened to.
Yeah.
So that's embodiment. Were you going to say something?
And just that you were the first one that I heard say she, not it, that your body's not an it. Your body's a she or whatever pronoun you want to put on your body. Like I heard you say she, I related to that. And would you say that comes into play here? Is that a piece of that embodiment, realizing, that you're not an it, like you said, not a separate, but that your body is a she, a he, whatever pronoun you put on it?
Yeah, I think it's one kind of language tool that we can use to help our body become a someone to us again. Because there are some things we would never say to a someone that we say to our body. There's some things we would never do. Like I'm a mom of a 3-year-old, and there are some things that when I think about parenting her, I'm like, I never say that to her. Right. Why am I saying that to me? Why am I saying that to myself? So that's one of the tools that we can use. And there's actually a scholar named Merleau-Ponty who talked about this, maybe 70 or 80 years ago now in some of his philosophical writings, where he said, like, no, we need to move towards like subjectivity. So many of us have done the object thing, but we need to do the subject thing, like the personhood thing. Okay. So language and being able to use metaphors of relationship, I think can really rehabilitate our like connection. Okay. So that, if using a pronoun for your body works, like go for it. I do not think that's the only way that we need to do it. So disembodiment, I think in contrast to that would be, there's a whole spectrum, right? And we will probably find ourselves on the spectrum of embodiment and disembodiment in various ways throughout the day, right? There are times when I think, okay, I'm going to I can't pay attention to that information inside of me because I have to be really focused on doing this other thing. But ideally, I come back to myself at the end of the day, or I find ways to reconnect. Disembodiment would be like fragmentation intracyclically, between maybe mind and body, or self and body, however we conceptualize that, and struggling with care, not feeling sensation, discarding sensation, treating our bodies like an object, believing our bodies don't have value or a thing to be used or had. Again, when I think about embodiment and disembodiment, like we can't separate that out from our relational experiences or society, because I don't know a single person who feels like their body is an object who hasn't also been made to feel that way in an intimate relationship, or by a parent, or by a coach, or something where they were like, you are a thing to be used. I can't tell you how many women have experienced that in sexual relationships, right? Your body is to be used by a man.
It's good or bad, period.
Yeah. So the ability to say disembodiment is like an individual phenomena. It just like kind of betrays the way that we belong to each other. And I wouldn't say there's anyone who struggles with disembodiment who hasn't been shown on some level that their bodies are bad or should be used. And so when we think about like coming into embodiment at different stages, I think that like the needs of where we're at are going to change at different stages of our life. Like, again, if I think about being in 20 years, I'm probably going to be needing to do more weight bearing exercise to help with like bone density than I needed to 20 years previously. And so like how I move my body and the kinds of things I choose for movement are going to be different through the lifespan. So what feels good for me, and also what do my body need, are going to be different at different seasons of our life. And I would have told you, maybe even 3 years ago, that what I needed in order to feel really good in my body was runs, like long runs. And I just realized like I'm in a kind of a different season right now. I don't run a ton. I would still consider myself a runner, but I'm doing a lot of dancing. So what does it look like to come into ourselves? Like, I think that we get to make some choices around that. What helps me feel connected to myself? What moves energy? What helps me like tend to myself? Like, what are the cues? But also desire. Like, what do I want? Am I connected to what I want? And what I want will be different at different seasons of my life. But I think if we can move back to like the universal in a way, that there are specificity. There are specificities around how we express or practice embodiment or re-embody ourselves. I think that there are some universal things like, can I pay attention to sensation inside? Can I work on increasing my attentiveness to that and the value of that? And I mean that from like, am I tired and do I need to lay down, to like, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need to use the washroom? Like, are these pants too tight? Should I get rid of these pants and buy pants that fit me? Like,
yes, the answer is yes, everyone. You should.
The answer is yes. I have a friend, Madison, who calls pants that fit her non-oppressive pants. And she'll say, this is like, I will not be controlled by big fashion. We won't be controlled by big fashion. It's not big pharma. It's big fashion. Don't tell me what size of pants I need to wear. So like being able to tune in and notice the details inside. I think that's something that's accessible for all of us. At any stage of life.
And hearing you say that, I'm thinking too of so many, myself included, but so many women I work with that I feel like are held back by wanting to be back, or feeling like we should be back to what we were doing 20 years ago. Like this idea that change is bad. Like our bodies change as we age. Okay, good. But also I should still be able to do all the things I did back then. And I should still be able to want to do it. And I feel like, I wonder if that's a piece of disembodiment too, that our minds are telling us, oh my gosh, I could do the splits 15, 20 years ago. I could do this before I had babies. I could do all those things. So I have to be able to get back there because that was my identity. Versus, can you listen to your body? Like you were saying, like maybe your body actually is telling you now, hey, I don't know if I really want to do that. I mean, versus the can or can't, like we put ourselves into those two camps of I can do it or I can't. And if I can't, then I'm bad and I'm weak or I'm wrong. Versus, do you actually still want to? Like, what's your body actually telling you? Do you still want to do those things? Maybe you do want to dance now, right? But that was never a part of your identity. I don't know. I see that, and so often it holds us back thinking I need to still be able to do the things I did back then, versus if you were embodied now and able to listen, would that allow you to be more in the present?
Right. Yeah. I want to take a little bit of a different angle at this because I think you're right on that. And I think we can add I want to see it a slightly different way. And this is again, the psychologist to me who's talking. I think we have a problem with grief in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that until we learn to grieve, it will be very hard to accept that life is always asking us to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we are disconnected from nature and the cycles of the earth, the more we will believe that we should live one certain way for our entire lives. But as I said earlier, our bodies are connected to nature, our expression of nature itself. And nature tells us all we have to do is look outside. I mean, maybe in the climates where you and I live, where there are seasons, to look outside and say, like every fall, the trees wither, they drop their leaves, and they hibernate, essentially. They store up energy to make something new for the next season that's coming. And my body is like that tree. My body is always letting go and giving up and surrendering what was before. But I think when we are disconnected from land and when we don't know how to let go or grieve, then we work really, really, really hard to hold on to what was. And I think that there's a reason for that in our culture. I don't want to pathologize any person by saying, I think that in our culture, we have actually said there is an ideal. It is what was younger, right? Youthfulness is still considered such an ideal for not just women, but I think for all people.
Yeah.
And that there is a fear we have around aging and a fear we have around loss because there is a very real currency around youthfulness in terms of like being able to access belonging and social value as it's constructed in our society, as we're told this is what's superior. So until we get better at grieving, I don't think we're going to be able to step into claiming that there is something good here and now. And until we can, at the level of the individual, begin to say like, oh no, culture was wrong. I'm going to reclaim something here. I don't think we'll be able to create cultural, like widespread cultural change that allows us to value every age.
And I wonder if it's okay to do both. I think too around the grieving. I think that's exactly right. That just feels right to me. But I think sometimes we also feel like, okay, if I'm going to grieve, I grieved it. And now I'm moving right on. Like, yes, I'm going to the next thing then. My grieving's done. Close the door. Here I go. And I don't know if this really hit me maybe around my hysterectomy. I needed it. I had my 2 babies. I was so thankful. And also grieving that I had to have it, that I couldn't have more babies. I mean, it was all wrapped up. There's no way I could piece out, yes, I'm grieving, and yes, I'm thankful. Yes, I'm sad. I can't go back to that. And yes, I'm excited for what's next. And I wonder, along with, yes, grieving better, if we need to realize, you know what, it's all a part of us. Like all of that is a part of me. I'm not going to leave it behind to become something different. I'm taking all of those lessons and messages with me, and I can grieve them and be thankful for them. Like it's just all an amalgam of everything.
Yeah. It's almost like we need to come back to the things that we teach our kids. Like you can feel 2 things at once.
Yeah.
2 things can be once at true. Or two things can be true at once, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. This can be really hard and also natural and okay. And there can be beauty here.
Right. And I love the idea of talking to other people too, and just coming to back to that really quick, because I feel so many people do talk to me about how do I make friends as an adult. So this idea of community is so important, and I think it also it adds stress sometimes to women who do feel I'm taking care of aging parents and kids and this. Like, I don't have time. What are you talking about? And how do I make those friends in the carpool line? Or I'm just feeling pulled in so many different directions. Or even I look to my parents who are in their late 70s who have such good friends that they've made just in the last 5 years. And I look to see, how do you do that? And so just saying to people, maybe you don't need friends that have been there for you for 30 years. If you don't have that, don't stress. It doesn't mean you're missing out. You can still find community in different ways. I just think it takes effort. Like it just does. It takes work. You're going to have to work at putting yourself out there and saying yes to some invitations, whatever it is. I don't know. I think it's different for all of us, but yes, taking away the stress. If you don't have friends from 30 years ago, it's okay. You can still find community, but yeah, you're going to need to work for it. You can't just find it on Instagram. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did, but it doesn't. I would love to talk about, I know, and this is a subject we didn't get into much today, that I know you've written about in Wisdom of Your Body, and I've heard you talk about it. And it's one that actually is really important to me in my personal history. But you have a book coming out April 15th, right? April 15th, called Holy Hurt. And I would love for you to talk whatever you can tell us about that.
Well, as it relates to disembodiment and embodiment, I think one of the primary places of the messages that our bodies are bad and are dangerous has been, for many of us, religious contexts. I don't think that that's true of all religions or all religious experiences, but I think that there's a predominant narrative in, I would say, evangelicalism in Western white contexts where there has been a really, really, really strong message disseminated that bodies are bad and dangerous and are actually what keeps us from what is sacred. And they interfere with God, they interfere with spiritual practice. And then there's purity culture on top of that, which has been this, this high control around sexual behavior subculture within Christianity and some other religions, which has reinforced your body is dangerous, right? It can't be trusted. It's unwise. And so when I think about why the conversation about embodiment is so important in North America, is that there's a legacy of, I would argue, religious and spiritual trauma where people have been systematically and institutionally disconnected from their bodies and have good reasons to fear their bodies because they were told that it's going to get in the way of this other thing that they value or their belonging. And so this book that I wrote called Holy Hurt is about us confronting spiritual trauma and religious trauma. It's about why it happens, how it works, what it does to us, and how we heal. And my hope is that in sharing this book with people, I think I have two hopes. The first one is that people who have been hurt by religious contexts can have a way to explain why they feel so hurt. Because often the hurt that comes from religion is so like muddled and tangled in the beauty of the religion and the belonging and the connection and the family and what do I do now and my whole belief system and the future and eternity. And it's become so hard to ask the question, like, why am I so hurt? Why am I feeling so stuck? Where are these injuries coming from? And then I think and really to give voice to survivors. I think that's probably my primary aim. The secondary aim, I think, is actually like a love letter to religion. It's a way of saying, if you listen to the voices of the people who have been hurt, I think that you will actually understand how to do the thing that you came here to do in the first place, which is heal and connect and love and bring good news. And so this is not a message about shaming religion or people in religion, but looking at the systems that are abusive and toxic that do the very opposite of the thing that they say that they want to do. And how, as people, we can begin to make sense of our trauma in a way that leads us towards more wholeness. So the book is like, it's heavy, it's honest.
Yeah.
It's important, I think. And if you look really closely, I think it's incredibly hopeful that when we cannot heal wounds that we don't acknowledge exist.
Yeah.
So my hope is that in acknowledging wounds that exist both inside of us and systemically in our culture, in the landscape of North America, I think religious trauma permeates pretty much every institution. In fact, the even reason that there are settlers on Turtle Island on Indigenous land is because of spiritual trauma, is because of spiritual and religious abuse. So I think when we look at those wounds and we begin to ask questions about how the legacy of those wounds live inside of us, that we can actually begin to heal. And there's something very, very hopeful.
Yes. And I think, again, having a history with that, I can say that when I found embodiment again is when I truly believed my body was good. But it took that journey of going through it and going through that, yes, the messages that I had heard, so many of us have heard about our bodies are bad or even just disconnected, right? Like you talk about mind over matter and that disconnect of, oh, I separate my mind from my body. But once you can kind of come into it and realize, and also you're good. And it's not either or, right? It's and. So I love it. I think it's really important, and I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you so much.
And I want to end. I want to read a quote from Wisdom of Your Body. I just love this quote so much, and I thought it kind of wrapped up so much. You said, treasuring our bodies in a way that extends beyond appearance is an invitation to recognize that right here in this breath and in this space I take up on the earth, I have autonomy, agency, and creativity, and it is good. Yes. Amen. It's a word. It's a word.
It's a word.
It's a word. It's so good. Tell us where we can find you if people want to find your work, find you. Where are the best places to do it?
Yeah. So I have a website, HillaryLMcBride.com, and there's usually updates on speaking engagements and book things and like some media hits and things like that. So you can head to my website. On Instagram, Hillary Leanna McBride. I'm trying to think of where else I'm threads under the same name. If you head onto my website and just hang out for a minute, you'll see that there's a newsletter you can sign up for. I try a couple times a year to highlight, okay, here's where I'm going to be. Here's where we can connect. If you want to sign up for my book launch team, because we'll be recruiting folks for the book launch team, you'll be able to find that on my socials and website as well.
Awesome. And you all, Dr. McBride does retreats, in-person retreats. I don't know how many a year you do, but I mean, they're regular.
Yeah, 4 or 5.
Okay. Yeah. And I think I just am so drawn to them. If you are looking for, just deeper connection like we talked about, I can't imagine a safer place to bring yourself, your body, your feelings, your story. I think it would be such a safe place. So look into those too if you happen to be anywhere. Because do you travel to do those or only?
I do. Yes, I do. We've got a couple coming at mid-April, one in just outside of LA. There'll be a men's one actually coming up. I lead men's retreats with she's my best gal pal, Lisa Gunger. So we lead these together. They're called Sacred Feminine. Then it's a couple others that I do through the year. One's called Meaning Making. And it's about quilting your way through motherhood. So quilting and processing the motherhood transition. So there's lots. You can find that on my socials or website.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So thrilled to have you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
I loved being here. Thank you for the rich conversation and your warm welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody.